I had to write in between breaks. So when I was teaching at the Japanese school in Hilo, it was a perfect job. 2 weeks I'm there, make really good money teaching ESL. Then there'd be 2 weeks or 6 weeks or something. Then I would work full time, sometimes 8 hours working on the novels.
Welcome to Midlife Dialogues, where we talk to people 50 and over who are doing interesting things with their lives. And today we're talking to Tom Peake. Welcome, Tom. It's so nice to talk to you.
Aloha, Leslie. It's great to be here on your program.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that you have lived a really interesting life so far. And I want to start with this. Where did you grow up?
I grew up on a little island in the backwaters of the Mississippi River in Minnesota called Gray Cloud Island.
That sounds very Tom Sawyer to me.
Yeah, I was about to say Huck Finn
Oh,
because he was more the rascal, I think, of the pair, right? But yeah, it was very much. I had a canoe. I would portage the canoe down to Gray Cloud Lake and then out into Medicine Wood Lake and then out into an archipelago of backwaters islands in a bend in the river about 20 miles below the Twin Cities. And it was a throwback kind of upbringing, a very
wow.
tight-knit community that was also divided over strip mining for sand and gravel that was being barged from the islands up the river to the expanding Twin Cities. But it was a great upbringing living on Gray Cloud Island. And I lived there, by the way, half my life. After
Oh,
college, I went back and rented a place not too far from my parents. And
yeah.
I've only lived really on Gray Cloud Island in Minnesota on the river and on the big island of Hawaii.
Oh,
In
that's interesting.
Hawaii, that's it. I'm an islander my whole life.
Now, tell me how you got to Hawaii from there.
So there was a woman involved in the battle, which my family was involved with. In Hawaii terms, you'd call her one of my aunties. She was a friend of my mother who'd known me since I was a keiki or a young child. And she had helped fight the mining company. And at age 55, she up and left Gray Cloud for some place called Hilo, Hawaii.
Oh,
And so when I was kind of burned out, I took a vagabond journey. And when I was on the West Coast camping and staying with friends, somebody said, "Hey, didn't you tell me about this woman from Gray Cloud who went to Hawaii?" Well, there's a cheap plane ticket here. I got the plane ticket. I flew out to Hilo, and she was living in Keaukaha in a 1940s or 50s vintage bungalow near the cold ponds, and with her Filipino boyfriend, who was totally connected to the local community, having grown up on the Big Island, but also he had a big extended family that included Native Hawaiians. So the minute I got here, knowing nothing about Hawaii, I was suddenly immersed in local culture. And then the first day that I was there, Teddy drove us up to Kilauea, and the second day up to Halepohaku on Mauna Kea. And suddenly I realized, hey, this place is even more primordial than where I grew up, which was Gray Cloud Island. So that's how I got here, by accident, a vagabond accident.
that's an interesting story. And now you live on Kilauea, right? You live in the town of Volcano here
Yes.
on the island of Hawaii. Tell me what it's like there. What do you like about living there?
It's dark at night, which means that when it's not raining, we can see the stars and the Milky Way. It's quiet, and we live in the rainforest, so it's very primordial. And we're 7 minutes from the park. Both my wife and I have been eruption duty rangers for the park. So whenever there's an eruption, we're up there in the very early stages of any activity.
And what did you mean when you said it's primordial? Describe that to us.
It's not a city park where the city or county crew trim the lawns. It's wild. It's got a wild spirit, whether you're in the forest or you're on the slopes of the active volcano. And then at night, there are no lights. You have access to what I had access to when I grew up in Gray Cloud Island. Before the Twin Cities expanded, we could even see the northern lights from my backyard.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been very blessed that both my upbringing, the first half of my life on the river, and then the second half here on the Big Island, that I've had immediate access to the primordial. And between the ocean here and the active volcano, which is the domain of the Hawaiian goddess Pele, you really understand why people who've lived here for generations think of it in that way. You have to elevate it beyond something normal because it is actually extraordinary.
Were you already a writer when you got here to Hawaii?
Yes, so I had written for at least almost a decade for the University of Minnesota, but it was all public policy stuff related to environment, intergovernmental relations, the stuff I was studying when I was in graduate school at the Hubert Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs. But I had also written commentaries occasionally for St. Paul and Minneapolis newspapers, just as a freelance thing. back in the day when such a thing they would actually send you a check. And so I'd done a lot of writing, but I started journaling in my 20s. And I don't know what I'm going to do with all those journals, but I got, probably got 100 of them or more by now. But that also meant that I was constantly checking in on and reflecting upon my life. And I grew up in a family of writers. Both my mother and my father wrote. But while I was on a vagabond journey, my mother sent me a book called Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg,
I know the book.
which was a sort of a Zen approach to writing and how to get out of your way and tap your right brain, where your intuition, or what we call in Hawaii, na'au, how to access that. And so that was critically important in making the switch. Of course, it helped to also vagabond through the South Pacific and get caught in a coup in Fiji and swim with whales off the coast of Niue. You had to have life experience to stir that up and try to tap that. But the book was key.
Your first novel was Daughters of Fire, right?
That's the first published novel.
And now you've just got a new novel out. So that's what we're going to talk about now. Mauna Kea. And Mauna Kea, of course, is the volcano that towers over Hawaii Island. It's such a presence here, pretty much anywhere you are on the island. And it's one that's very sacred to Native Hawaiians. Tell us a little bit about your new novel and what it's about.
So at one level, it's a page-turning adventure. There's romance, suspense, magical realism, which is kind of a continental way of saying Native Hawaiian culture and spirituality, political intrigue, something that might be a murder, all while there's a hurricane dancing off the coast of the island. But at another level, it's also an honest, revealing book about today's Hawaii. Both books are journeys into the deeper beauty and hidden turmoil of America's 50th state. And then as far as Mauna Kea, at its core, I'm hoping it's a heart-opening tale that illuminates the power of aloha in an age of polarization and violence.
It's a sensitive topic. I was struck as I was looking at this book. You're writing about an indigenous culture, and writing about any indigenous culture right now when you are not of that culture yourself can be very highly charged. How did you come to write about the mountain and its story and the culture and the people?
So that's an important question. And so I have a 30-year relationship with Mauna Kea because after coming back from hitchhiking by boat through the South Pacific, I had just enough money to see if I could get a job on the Big Island. And I got hired miraculously to be one of the early tour guides at the visitor center on Mauna Kea at Halepohaku, 9,000 feet up. So I was living and working on the mountain. When Daughters of Fire came out, the response from the local community, including Native Hawaiians, was like, thumbs up, brah. I never got any blowback about, well, you're the haole. Now, some of my friends were worried, is this going to be another dumb haole book? Haole meaning the foreigner book, or often to be taken as meaning Caucasian, but it really means foreigner, the person that doesn't get it, right? In fact, the response to Daughters of Fire from locals was, hey, bro, you nail politics of this state. Mahalo for your book, right? And we're used to living in a diverse community, and everybody has to navigate lots of different cultures. What people want is something that's honest. The other thing is, I also use beta readers, which means readers who read the book before it's published. In the case of both books, including Native Hawaiians and locals. And I've been blessed with them generously offering their time to read the novels and then generously offering to tell me what they think and help me fix any misunderstandings or mistakes that I might have made. And so I think that that's the other protection that I've had in avoiding writing dumb haole books, right? Is because I rely on my friends, and I have a lot of friends in the local community and in the Native Hawaiian community. One of the great influential books on me in writing fiction was from John Gardner, who is a novelist and a short story writer, but he was an acclaimed writing teacher. And he said, to be psychologically suited for membership in what I have called the highest class of novelists, the writer must be not only capable of understanding people different from himself, but fascinated by such people. He must have sufficient self-esteem that he is not threatened by difference, and sufficient warmth and sympathy, and a sufficient concern with fairness that he wants to value people different from himself. And finally, he must have, I think, sufficient faith in the goodness of life that he can not only tolerate, but celebrate a world of differences, conflicts, oppositions. I aspire to being that kind of novelist.
That's a great description of what you're doing, and good for you. I wanted to say too, I was so interested in your novel's structure because it starts with a sort of a prologue in the year 1268, and then it moves to 750 years later, which my math put at 2018, and then it goes back to 1965. Tell me why that structure. How did you use that to frame the story you wanted to tell?
Both of my novels begin with a historical prologue. Because one thing I've learned here is that you cannot look at Hawaii without placing what is actually happening today in its historical context and with respect to traditional cultural practices. I made all those decisions with my na'au, with my intuition. After teaching 30 years of Natalie Goldberg's approach to writing, I use that Zen approach, and I do not write with an outline. I do not sit and think about how do I want to structure this. I just sit down and I write. And then the story comes up. I find out what story have I already processed inside me based on my life experience. What story have I processed that I now want to get on the page? And then I do everything I can to make sure I stay away from a busy mind that will interrupt that process. So I try to get as close to what my na'au, my intuition, is telling me. And that's how I wrote both novels. But I've often been asked about both novels, how did you get everything in there so tightly woven? I did not do it consciously. I trusted my na'au that those threads will come together if I just stay out of the way and don't think about it too much. Does that make sense?
As a writer, I understand that completely. That's one of the most fun things about writing, that magic that happens where you take the things that you're working on and it weaves itself into something bigger you didn't even know you were writing. I think that's fascinating. I wanted to ask you if you would read us the 3 paragraphs at the bottom of page 6. And I think that is just a perfect description of the history of Hawaii. I've never seen it accounted for so succinctly.
Sure. So this is in the historical prologue to the book, and just before it shifts to the contemporary story. The early Hawaiians who had risked their lives to honor their revered ones would all but vanish under the new regime. A clandestine remnant survived for many generations, but apparently they too disappeared, but not their legacy. That lived on in the ancestral memories of the men and women who, despite generations of intermarriage with the conquerors from Tahiti, still carried their DNA. The Tahitians brought a contentious seed of competition to the volcanic archipelago, and centuries of interfamilial conflict ensued. Despite the bloody turmoil played out at the coast, the bones of the great navigators buried high on Mauna Kea remained undisturbed for almost 700 years, guiding those who felt their spirit toward peace, light, and love, virtues honed by generations, making long voyages at sea and living simply on small islands. Later, a new empire took over the archipelago, a continental people less familiar with the sea and ignorant of the cooperative rules that voyaging life and island life demand. The new conquerors had little regard for the past, even their own, a strange, rootless people looking only to the future.
That's perfect. I really love that part. I want to talk to you about something else that I really loved about this book. There is at the start of this book a pen and ink map of the mountain and its surroundings. And it reminded me of, Winnie the Pooh, which has its map of the 100-acre wood. And The Hobbit has one of those pen and ink drawings that says, "Here be tigers." And the Phantom Toll Booth has an epic map that I used to pore over those maps for hours when I was a child. And not that this is a child's story in any sense, but that sense of exploration and wonder that those sort of maps bring to you. I just love that.
That's an old tradition. All of those examples you listed, I'd add, Huck Finn, Moby Dick, Joseph Conrad stories. They always had these pen and ink drawings. And many of them, if they were adventure stories, which ostensibly mine is, there would be a map. And the map is part of the wonder. You're using a visual stimulus to sort of tap that part of the brain that gets people like, oh, this is a magical island, right? And so I asked John Dawson, who had done the map for Daughters of Fire and the illustrations for Daughters of Fire, and who I had originally met when we worked at Hawaii Volcanoes National Park on exhibits together. He had done this many years ago for other books, and he was delighted to do it. And he's a very magical person. He lives in Hilo.
I just think those are great. One review of your novel called you an organic intellectual in the tradition of Mark Twain. Wow, that's extraordinary.
I was moved by that. This was a guy who'd been a university professor, a poet, and then I thought about, that he really nailed it. That you probably get the best ideas if you intimately interact with life, which is what Twain did. It's what Conrad did. It's what Melville did, right? The book reflects the river. It reflects the mountain, the island, the people I've known in all those places. And so in that sense, I did a lot of other research out of books, but the primary inspiration for the novel and much of what you read about, I saw with my own eyes.
Tom, what's next? Is it too soon to talk about your next project? Do you have another novel in the works or in your head, or what's next?
I have a novel in progress. I haven't had a lot of time to work on it, but I'm well into the next novel, which is a sequel to the other two novels.
Oh,
which are not a series.
Yeah, that's interesting. Tell us more about that.
It's a sequel to the extent that some of the characters that my readers love, they do come back in the new novel, but the new novel is set in 2050.
Oh, I love that. How interesting. How interesting. So characters from both of your books?
Some of the younger characters who are in their 30s, they're kupuna now.
I see.
They're elders.
Did you have that in mind while you were writing this book, or?
No, I had a different next book in mind. I don't know if it was late at night or when I first got up in the morning when my na'au is really good. It was like, hey, 2050, what does the archipelago and the world look like in 2050? And what would my characters think about that?
Thank you so much, Tom Peake. This has really been fun talking to you. I've loved hearing about your books and how you think. It's fascinating. I love it.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. I love talking to you. And everybody, thanks for watching Midlife Dialogues, and watch for part 2 with Tom coming up.
Aloha.